We are live. Good to see you today, my EOS podcast friends. Today, we're here with Myles Snider from Aurora EOS, and we're going to talk about some of the most interesting things going on in EOS and Aurora, obviously. So, Myles, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm Myles Snider. I'm the CEO of Aurora EOS. We are a mainnet block producer candidate, one of the more recent entrants into the block producer game. We launched in September. And yeah, super excited to be here.
Cool, man. Well, it's great to have you, and I think it's gonna be a fun show today. What do you think's most interesting going on in EOS today, just for you?
It's a tough question to answer. We've been doing a weekly newsletter that's like a roundup of everything happening in EOS, and like every week I feel like there's some like new issue or thing happening that is fascinating to me. I think like on a more macro level, the thing to me that's probably the most interesting about EOS is that it's the first blockchain where we've seen people build like fully on-chain profitable businesses. And, thus far that's taken the form of like these, DApp casinos, right? That are doing like gambling games. I think that's just a very early proof of concept for what we're going to see. And EOS has an architecture that no other blockchain has that offers the ability to sort of run these enterprise grade applications or decentralized applications. And that's a combination of like throughput, latency, usability, whether it's like account names or like transactions and things like that. And I think also the different options offered by the permission system are huge. All those together kind of create this operating system upon which, for the first time, we can see sort of enterprise level applications get built. And so there's all sorts of things that you can do with that, and I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation. We already are seeing a lot of experimentation, but certainly in the future things will get even crazier. But the thing to me that's most interesting right now is something like EOS Bet or Bet Dice, where you have a business that exists on the blockchain and is actually generates revenue, is profitable, offers a service to its users. And I think one of the coolest things about it is that it then sort of programmatically takes those earnings and distributes them to the developer team, to shareholders. Some of it goes back into the pot for to sort of increase the value of the available funds for people to gamble on. And obviously all this is taking place in a very specific vertical, which is gambling. We saw that take off with EOS Bet, and then a bunch of other companies followed suit to try to capitalize on what EOS Bet proved to be a really interesting opportunity. But I think that's just the beginning, and I think this idea of having these decentralized autonomous corporations that are whose rule set and governance structure and business structure is entirely programmatically on chain is super interesting to me.
Yeah, that's it. The DACs are really interesting. I'd love to get into those. But as far as EOS Bet and EOS Dice, that model has been working so well. And what do you think? How do you think what's the downside, or how's that kind of? I mean, right now the only thing that can necessarily stop it is if users stop using it. Is that right? I mean, how does that system break? I mean, it seems pretty solid.
So I think there's a couple of things. Like one is that to what extent these things are fully decentralized, to what extent they're actual DApps is debatable and depends on the projects. Because remember, there's a bunch of them. There's EOS Bet and there's Bet Dice, which are the two big ones. But there's several others. And I should start by saying this is not investment advice. I'm not endorsing or saying that anyone should go out and buy these tokens or anything like that. But there's a few things that could go wrong. One is that there's certainly legal issues around any sort of token that does like a revenue share. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really analyze that, but certainly I think in some jurisdictions those would maybe be considered securities. And if any government organization chose to sort of go after those projects, they could get in touch with the development team and potentially shut down those operations and blah blah blah. And you could see a future in which these projects can continue without that sort of core development team, or other people could take up the mantle, or whatever it may be. But I think some of them are still centralized in certain aspects of their operation. And I actually think that is going to be a trend that we'll see a lot, because people talk about decentralization like it's a binary, and it's really not. It's much more of a spectrum. Or you could even say within any given application or network, there's parts of it that are centralized and parts of it that are decentralized. And I think with a lot of these things that will get built on blockchains like EOS, you may have a sort of company that's at the center of something, meaning that in that way it's kind of centralized, but it's decentralized in the sense that these smart contracts that users are interacting with are on the blockchain and are sort of programmatic. So for example, say you've got a betting website that, you know, they own the URL and the sort of the portal where users go to play, and they own that user experience, and they've got a developer team that actually works to update all of that. Well, in those ways, it's kind of centralized, but as a user, you go there, and when you place a bet, you're actually interacting with a smart contract. So you're not trusting that team to not steal your money, because you can actually see that on chain, and the smart contract is where you're sending your money. So I think that sort of hybrid model is what we're going to see a lot of, where the parts that require that sort of counterparty trust will be put on chain, but maybe the business itself will still be owned by a centralized entity, and the extent to which they go sort of fully decentralized or not is going to be dependent on the model.
Yeah, that's the approach it seems like teams are taking, is that we're not real sure how to decentralize the whole thing yet, but we can decentralize this part, we can do this part how we know, and we'll take baby steps and figure that out as we go. And that's for me, that's the general thesis around EOS is that you have one end of the spectrum that's like just full governed, like the U.S. government, for example, or like what we have now, how we govern ourselves now. And then you have the other end of the spectrum that code is law, like Bitcoin. And then there's this place where EOS sits in the middle, where we know that we can do some of these things better with governance, but we don't know how to do all of it with code is law. There's this spot in the middle where EOS sits that it's a give and take, and it's a spectrum, like you say. And I like that spot because it enables us to move more quickly and figure things out as we go, as opposed to having to figure it all out on the front end and then hope it works and doesn't break. You know,
I think that sort of the position where EOS sits on that spectrum is both its greatest opportunity and its greatest challenge.
Yeah.
Code is law is a very simple approach, but it's also super predictable and super sort of socially scalable. When you do something that's more along the lines of, we want to enforce code, but understand that things go wrong and there needs to be a process for upgrading and all that gets a lot messier. But of course, it also offers you the opportunity to potentially avoid some of the problems that have plagued other platforms. I don't think that the EOS community has quite figured that out yet. I think our governance processes are still pretty immature and still being defined. And that's, in my opinion, the biggest challenge for EOS right now. And we'll probably talk more about that when I talk about some of the stuff that Aurora is doing. But I think that, if done correctly, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas where you see this, where you think the next kind of inroads will be? Like we just talked about EOS Bet Dice. They're partially decentralized, partially not. Where do you think after gambling, maybe some of this momentum flows?
It seems pretty clear to me that gaming is the next vertical that's gonna take off. So if you look at the most popular DApps or HAPs, if you want to call them, hybrid apps, on EOS, there's if you go to dapradar.com, there's 50 gambling sites, 40 of which are just clones of 10 that are maybe doing actual innovation. And then you've got a few games, but the biggest one is EOS Nights. So this is sort of another example of a hybrid business model. So you've got EOS Nights. It's built by a centralized company. I believe it's a Korean company. and it's a game that exists on chain, and you can own digital objects that are tied to your EOS account, so you actually own them, and you can sort of trade them within the game and buy and sell them, and what that does is it actually again is a business model for EOS Nights, right? Like I haven't played it too much, but my understanding is that if you want to go do EOS Nights and buy a sword, you have two options. You can go to the marketplace and buy a sword from another user that has it, or I think you can buy a sword from EOS Nights itself. And so, like, in some ways, what the DApp or what the game does is it gets users onboarded. They pay for certain things within the app, and then once they own them, they can sell them to other users if they want. But that initial purchase, that revenue goes to EOS Nights. And by building it on a blockchain, they offer users more sort of ownership of their digital items, but two, they kind of have this global. They get access to this global user base with much fewer barriers to entry than if you said, okay, we're going to build a game, but if you want to buy something in it, you have to, go through PayPal or a credit card or something like that. Like anyone out there who holds EOS can go, participate in the EOS Nights game. And so they, once again, have built a profitable game business on EOS. They're really the major one right now, but like we saw that Mythical Games, which is a bunch of ex-Activision executives, just raised, I think, $16 million to build blockchain games specifically focused on EOS. And I've seen a number of other companies and individuals and organizations that are working in that vertical. And that makes sense because we can kind of see some of the benefits of building a blockchain on a game and having self-sovereign ownership of digital assets and things like that. But up until this point, there's been very significant barriers to anyone seeing much success in that space, because the other blockchain platforms that have come before EOS have generally had very low throughput, very high latency, and very either high or unpredictable fees. So that's one of the things we saw around CryptoKitties, is it just like it couldn't, the popularity exceeded what the underlying blockchain was capable of handling. Fees got really high, things got congested, et cetera, et cetera. EOS addresses or fixes a lot of those issues. And so it really is kind of the first blockchain platform where we're getting actual users to play and use a game makes sense. So I think that without a doubt, gaming is going to be the next thing that we see kind of take off. And that can take all sorts of forms. To be honest, I didn't grow up like as a gamer. I never like was a big like video gamer either on like consoles or on the computer. So it's not necessarily my area of expertise. But I've done my best to sort of do the research and listen to people who know what they're talking about. And that to me seems pretty clear.
Yeah, I love thinking about the opportunities that the game vertical has. I got High Fidelity coming on the show.
Oh, nice.
Probably that'll probably pop out on Monday if everything happens right. But yeah, High Fidelity is doing the whole Second Life thing, which is, I didn't play Second Life, but it's basically like a massive online multiplayer, but without really quests, and people are like almost just living in this area and doing whatever they want, as opposed to like some sort of linear goal that they have. But the idea that they're going to put something like Second Life onto the EOS blockchain where you own all your stuff within the game is just this huge gap of, I think people are going to look back one day and not believe that we used to play video games and not own our items physically, or not necessarily physically, but not have a sovereign ownership over our items. I think will be a big, people look back and laugh, like, why would you even want a sword in a video game if you didn't own it? Why would you buy it? So
yeah. I mean, as it exists today, if you own a sword in like, I don't know, World of Warcraft or something, that exists within this siloed database that is World of Warcraft. And I think people have like traded digital items, and so like from World of Warcraft, but it requires them to like go meet up in person with someone and exchange it. I actually know I knew a guy in college who got robbed doing that.
No way.
Yeah, because that's what it was required. You had to like take it, like not off-chain isn't the right word, but offline to go do the transaction, because there was no marketplace that existed, because World of Warcraft wanted to keep that siloed. but we know that those things, or like trading skins, there's been marketplaces for that. And so we know the demand exists for people to sort of take ownership of and then have marketplaces for their digital items. But we haven't had true like self-sovereign digital ownership until now. And I think, with especially with the EOS blockchain, that becomes possible in a really interesting way. And I think we'll see huge activity around that. And then the other reason that I think gaming stands a really good chance of becoming the next major vertical is that EOS is still pretty immature in a lot of ways. It's the user onboarding process isn't perfect. You have to be somewhat crypto native to be able to use it. It still requires some degree of technical expertise. And I think there's a lot of progress that EOS has made and a lot of features that make it better poised to capture sort of mainstream non-crypto native users. But as it stands right now, it's more likely that people who are already kind of technical will get involved. And generally speaking, gamers are a more technical audience than audiences for other verticals out there, like maybe, like the decentralized finance vertical or the decentralized social media vertical or things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's like and not only are they more technical, they're like the perfect target market. They're the generation that's grown up kind of playing internet games, playing video games, grown up with the internet, with phones. They're the ones who are ready to adopt crypto anyway. So and
I think they're more used to like the idea of making like purchases of digital items and like seeing the value there.
Yeah. It like took me forever before I was like actually shopping Amazon on my phone. Like there was kind of this little gap and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty easy. But some people that was like, they were 9 years old doing that, so.
Totally.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Gaming's going to be big. What do you think, outside of gaming, do you have any, what would it be? I know that there's kind of a gap between the next kind of interesting things, but maybe the financial markets like something like Warbly, or where do you think the other?
So I think there's two pieces of like infrastructure that all smart contract platforms or decentralized operating systems, decentralized application platforms need that fuel a lot of the other use cases that could become really interesting. And that is decentralized exchange and stablecoins. Okay. So we have seen a number of decentralized exchanges get built on EOS. There hasn't been one in my opinion, and I haven't been paying super close attention, but there hasn't been one yet that's like sort of emerged as kind of the winner that's got like, the most liquidity or best user experience or whatever. And my understanding is that most of these are, they're like centralized order books that are maintained on a server off chain. And all that happens on chain is the transfer of the assets, which is trustless. So they're really non-custodial exchanges more than decentralized exchanges. Now, those are super useful because it allows you to trade directly from your wallet. You don't have to take counterparty risk. It's generally a lot faster, et cetera, et cetera. But I think having like a fully on-chain DEX is something that we'll absolutely see on EOS because, again, you have the transaction throughput to be able to do something like that. As we know, Dan Larimer's first project was BitShares, which I was a BitShares user back in like 2014 because I thought the stablecoins were really cool. And that was a fully on-chain decentralized exchange. So every, bid, ask, sell, fill, all of that was actually logged on-chain. It was super cool. And BitShares had like 3-second block times and probably, equivalent or maybe a little bit lower throughput than EOS. And the decentralized exchange actually worked, quite well. So I think you could get an even better user experience with EOS. And the reason that fuels a lot of other use cases is because any of these use cases, like the ones that we discussed, that involve like self-sovereign ownership of digital assets, well, you need a marketplace where you can trade those things. So you want a marketplace where you can go and trade some of these tokens, potentially trade NFTs, which aren't like, those are non-fungible tokens. So that's a little bit of a different ballgame. But certainly if there's tokens that are associated with dApps in any ways, you want the ability to trade those without having to leave the ecosystem of the decentralized operating system that is EOS. So that's one piece of infrastructure. The other piece of infrastructure, I think, is stablecoins, because if you want to attract mainstream users, you want to allow them to interact with these things using a unit of account that they're familiar with. Because using crypto for payments, I mean, you're a crypto guy, I'm a crypto guy. We've all done it. It's not the best experience, right? Like, I don't know if you ever bought anything with Bitcoin like back in the day, but like you probably look back now and you're like,
I've got a great example. We were at the scaling blockchain event right after the EOS hackathon.
Yep.
And so, it's an EOS event with like a pretty concentrated group of EOS gangsters. And we were supposed to buy lunch with EOS, and like barely anyone could do it. It's like, oh, this is okay. This is very telling right here. So yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think it's about the sort of like the price fluctuations. The other thing is that like EOS has a really unique token model, and it's, in my opinion, one of the most interesting token models because of what it does for transaction fees. But what EOS really is it's a way of allocating resources on the back end of this database. And so I think for most users, they will either not want to, they won't really have to know about EOS. I think that'll get allocated to them by the DApp. But it really should be for like bandwidth allocation. Whereas if you want to be spending, you should be doing that with a stable coin, because one, it's stable, so you're not worried about price fluctuations. Two, it's a unit of account that you're familiar with, because most of them are pegged to the dollar. So you can kind of just think of it as a digital, blockchain native version of the dollar. And three, it allows you to say, you know what, like I'm going to keep all of my EOS staked so I can get maximum bandwidth capacity right now. You don't have to do this calculation where you're like, all right, I guess I'll stake 80% and then keep the other 20% liquid so I can pay for things with it. And, if I spend all my liquid EOS and decide I want to pay for more things, I got to unstake and that takes 3 days and blah, blah, blah. I think it's a better user experience if you have that. And then finally, there's certain use cases where paying for things or using applications where you're denominating in crypto is just not that useful. So if you're doing like an insurance contract or a lending contract, or you're betting on a prediction market, you may be taking risk in other ways, and you don't want to take on additional price risk with that. So say that you're betting on the outcome of a sports game that takes place in a week. You want to bet a certain amount on that, and maybe you win the bet, but the price of EOS has gone down in this week. So you end up coming out with less money than you actually put in. Those things are avoided by using stablecoins. So I think when we have both of those key pieces of infrastructure, it opens up the possibility for a lot of other interesting use cases to come forward.
Yeah, those are some huge points there. And the DEXs, you said that there hasn't been one that's kind of maybe doesn't have a ton of liquidity, because we need some network effect on an EOS DEX basically. It sounds like Block One will probably come out with some sort of DEX at some point. It would be a natural transition for that. That would be a real easy one to gain network effect on. Block One puts one out and people, okay, that's where we should be. And then, so that might be a quick, one.
Yeah, it's not just that like Block One would put it out and they're such a respected name within the ecosystem, but also like, Dan built BitShares, which was the first real like fully on-chain DEX. He's got a lot of experience there. He's got a lot of ideas there that he's talked about for a long time. I think on GitHub you can find like eosio.exchange from some of the Block One code. So like we know they're working on it. And I think, I agree with you. I think that when that comes out, that's going to be sort of a landmark moment.
Yeah, that'll be cool. That's kind of something I'm excited for this year, is those hopefully a few landmark moments with a DEX, with like maybe like a Steemit 2.0, especially the wallet should be fairly soon. I think there'll be these polished drops onto the EOSIO blockchain that'll be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, wallets actually, I didn't even mention that, but like talk about a core piece of infrastructure, like having easy to use, easy to onboard, easy to navigate tools for key management is really what they are, right? Like wallet is a sort of an interesting term, but what a true wallet is it's a place to securely store your keys and sign transactions on your behalf. So that's what Scatter is. People don't necessarily think of Scatter as a wallet, but I think of Scatter as like a little vault that sits in your computer that holds those keys that allows you to interact with any EOS DApp on the web using that. And then you've got some of these mobile wallets like Meet.one and Token Pocket and EOS Links that are, those are more like a combination of key management and DApp Explorer, right? So you can actually, from within the Meet.one wallet, you can go, play one of these gambling games, win some tokens, and then go sell those tokens on an exchange. But the heart of the service that they're providing is the key management and the secure storage of those keys and the ability to securely sign transactions with those keys. And so what Block One is working on with the Apple Secure Enclave is super exciting from that perspective.
Yeah, I love the block explorer aspect of the wallets that I've used. Just that makes it so easy to transition into using one of the applications, because that can be kind of a headache. I think that for the UI UX angle, I think that's big, and I hope that the Block One wallet has that. What was the last thing you just mentioned there?
The Secure Enclave?
Yeah, the Secure Enclave. Can you talk? Oh, yeah, in the Apple in the interface with Apple. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily like an expert on Secure Enclave or hardware security or anything like that, but my understanding is that within every iPhone there is a Secure Enclave that essentially works like a Ledger or a Trezor hardware wallet, where it's a very secure piece of hardware that actually generates a key pair, keeps the private key within that secure piece of hardware so that it's not accessible by any sort of malicious program or anything like that, and it signs the transactions for you. So if you onboard into EOS Wallet right now, what it usually does, you usually have two options. You can either import an account, in which case you have to take an existing private key and import that into the wallet, or maybe it onboards you, it creates an account for you, like something like EOS Links creates an account for you, and they give you they create a key pair for you. So it gives you a private key, and it's like this big message, it's like, copy this, keep a secure backup, make sure you don't lose this. If you lose this, you lose your account, all that stuff. And so, users are kind of used to like username and password. And they're especially used to the idea that like a password's not that important, because if you lose it, you can do password recovery. Private keys are not like that. They're much more they're much more sensitive, and you have to sort of guard them much more securely. So I think the idea that we're going to onboard, like mass onboard users by creating key pairs for them and saying, hey, here's your private key, don't lose it, is not realistic. Whereas if you do this through the Secure Enclave, what you do is that the Enclave actually creates the key pair for you, and the private key is stored in the Enclave. So you don't have to say to the user, hey, here's a copy of your private key, make sure you back it up. You can kind of say to the user, hey, here's an account, we created this account for you. You could show them their account name. Depending on the technical level of the user, you could show them their public key, but they don't really have to worry about the private key. They can more think about it as like, hey, we created an account for you, and your password is your fingerprint because it happens through Touch ID, or your password is your face because it happens through Face ID. And so that abstracts key management away from users in a really, really important way. So I think that's the number one most important thing. But the number two thing is that it just makes the user experience a lot better. So we're talking about, we're talking about being able to store large amounts of EOS in a mobile wallet in a way that is comparable security-wise to holding them in a ledger, and the ability to interact with the blockchain pretty seamlessly using either Touch ID or Face ID. So if anyone who's listening has used like EOS Links wallet, they allow you to sign transactions with Touch ID. And every time I do it, it feels kind of like a taste of the future because it's just so easy. Now, they're not actually using the Secure Enclave. They're using what's called, maybe it's called Chain ID or something. I can't remember, but they're sort of encrypting the private key using Touch ID. The Block One solution takes it a step further. And so you can kind of imagine a future in which you'll be able to, store pretty large amounts of EOS on your mobile wallet, vote instantly just using the press of a button or showing your face to it, interacting with all these dApps, et cetera, and a lot of the scary, complex blockchain stuff is abstracted away from the user.
Yeah. Wow. the concept of taking blockchain tech or the EOS IO tech and weaving it in with this well-established tech that we already have is a bigger picture kind of next level for me also, because it's been almost siloed. Like the blockchain wants to build its own new internet and make its own new technology, but we don't necessarily have to do everything. There's stuff out there like the secure enclave that as we integrate, it can make leaps and bounds. So that's a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like if we, there's room for, I think, integration with existing systems. There's room for trust in the world. There's room for reputation and all these things. I think some of the crypto ecosystem has gone too far in the direction of don't trust, verify, code is law, all this stuff. I think for certain use cases that makes sense, but I think for other use cases, especially when we talk about onboarding, mass onboarding users, we need to leverage a lot of the tools we already have at our disposal.
Yeah, I of the same opinion that there is room for trust in the world. As humans, we've figured out how to govern ourselves for thousands of years, and we're not horrible at it. It's not completely broken. There's interactions we have that are optimized just on a human level. That's another part that can weave in just fine if we figure out how to do it. So there's the tech that's already there. There's how humans already interact, and then there's the blockchain. And as we weave them together, that's the goal here is that middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're holding a secure enclave, you got say you're a whale or an orca, you got a bunch of EOS on your phone, and it just takes a thumbprint to unlock. Is that going to be what are the security measures? Is it going to be walking around with $100,000 in your pocket or $1 million in your pocket, or
No. So actually that's a really good point. And I think this gets to one of my favorite features of the EOS IO software that makes it different from anything else out there is this permission system. So EOS offers the ability to customize your account in a way that is radically different from anything else that's ever been offered. So if you're a user on Ethereum, you basically have a key pair that defines your account. So you have a public key and a private key. Your private key is your password, and your public key is your email address. If I want to have you send me some ETH, I give you my public key and you send it there, and I can access those funds using my private key. And that's kind of it at a basic level. So you have to keep your private keys super, super secure, whether that's in a hardware wallet or completely offline. Depending on what you want to do on the blockchain, you may have to create multiple accounts. Say, my savings account that it is totally offline. I keep that key in a lockbox somewhere. Engraved into a crypto steel. And then I have another account that I use with my ledger that I can use for everyday payments or stuff like that. EOS offers the ability to completely customize this in a way that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. So instead of just having a single key pair that defines an account, EOS has a human readable account name, right? So, you could have, they have to be 12 characters, but say they could be whatever. You could have Happy Money Man as your account, right?
I've got Mr. Happy Money.
Mr. Happy Money, perfect. All right. So you've got Mr. Happy Money, which is this human readable account name, and then within that account name are a number of key pairs. So by default, you have an owner key and an active key. So the owner key controls root access to the account, meaning that if you wanted to transfer ownership of that account or drain all the funds or whatever it may be, it can do everything. That's like the master key. And then the active key can do everything except change the owner key. So the active key has full permissions, except that it doesn't actually own the account. Now, what you can do with EOS is you can actually create additional key pairs that are for specific actions. So you could create a new key pair that also exists under the Mr. Happy Money account that is only for voting. And the only thing that key can do is vote. So say that you wanted to, say that you've got 1,000 EOS in that account and you want to vote with that every week. Well, you can create a voting key and import that voting key into your desktop wallet. And then, every week you log on and you vote. And worst case scenario, if that key gets compromised or stolen or whatever, someone can change your vote. But you, because you control the higher permissions with the owner and active key, can go and change that key pair to a new key pair. So if I stole your voter key, you can actually change that out, and now that voter key is no longer controls voting on your account. Even if you want to get even crazier with the permissions, you can go and you can say, okay, my owner key is going to be actually a multi-sig of a number of other keys. So you could say, we're going to have, if I want to change the ownership of the account, I need a 2 of 3 multi-sig that consists of these other key pairs. You can do time delays. So you can say it's a 2 of 3 multi-sig, unless 30 days passes and then it becomes a 1 of 3. And you can do all sorts of these customizations and permissions, and you can say, here's a specific key just for posting to this on-chain forum or whatever it may be. And so the reason that this is really important for EOS is that EOS is a blockchain that's meant to be interacted with, right? It's not just like a store of value coin. Like I say just because I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, and I think it's really interesting for a lot of reasons, but it's primarily a store of value, right? So like my Bitcoin, I just keep that completely offline, right? Like that key is just stored somewhere else. And if I want to send money to my Bitcoin address, I've got the public key, but that just stays offline. And I'm happy to hold that for years offline. With EOS, like you want to be voting on chain, you want to be interacting with DApps, you want to be, potentially lending out your tokens, all of these things. And so historically with the structures of public blockchains, you have to make this decision between like offline cold storage or hot storage where I interact with the internet. EOS gives you the best of both worlds. So you could actually keep your owner key completely offline, even keep your active key offline, but create a key pair that say allows you to vote, allows you to transfer X amount of EOS per day, allows you to interact with these dApps. And that can be kept in your mobile wallet or your hot wallet or wherever it may be without requiring you to sort of split those funds among different accounts. So my guess is that for advanced users, what you're going to do is you're going to have, maybe you have all of your EOS staked. Say that you own, 20,000 EOS, right? You have all of those EOS staked, and the owner key is a 2 of 3 multi-sig that's kept completely offline. Well, maybe you create an active key with permissions for specific things that you want to do, and you keep that on your phone. And you set up restrictions on the amount that can be transferred by that key, the sort of what exactly it can do, and time delays and things like that. And so you get access to your 20,000 EOS worth of staked resources. But even if someone stole that key, they can't drain your account. They can't change the ownership of your account. They can only sort of do the limited set of things that you have specified for that key pair. And so I think, ultimately what this allows you to do is it gives you a level of customization that is super useful to advanced users, super useful to enterprises. And I think for a lot of users, it's going to be handled by the wallet provider sort of on the back end, and will allow the wallet provider to create a setup that's super secure and usable and all of that. And that can actually be abstracted away from the end user. But if you are an advanced user that wants to take advantage of these features, they're there for you. And if you're an enterprise that's building on EOS, there's all sorts of options available to you. So I think in the future, I think people will use things like the Block One mobile wallet, but I think the advanced users will just have permissions set up in such a way that allows them to sort of take full advantage of their account with resources and voting, but do so in a super, super secure and safe way.
Yeah, and that's kind of the logical step. It's the same way like with banking and things like that. The whales are much more, they go much more in depth with how to protect and secure their money and where it is and how it moves around. And same thing with EOS. There's probably whales out there or companies that are going to put a lot of time into how they utilize our private keys. And then there's going to be just people walking around every day with a few EOS that they're using, and it's not such a big, it's not such a big deal.
Totally. So, there's a really cool company called Casa Hodl. Have you heard of them?
No, that's cool.
Casa Hodl, that they do, they provide a service for sort of advanced high value Bitcoin users where they create like a multi-sig setup that's really secure and offer users the ability to protect their funds in a way that is both very secure against both like sort of like tech threats and like social threats, but also self-sovereign. It's one of the like coolest companies in my opinion in the Bitcoin space. And EOS has sort of, but it requires them to create this setup involving hardware wallets and sort of, third parties that could potentially help you in certain cases and all that. Whereas EOS allows you to kind of build those in on chain rather than having to go through these off-chain setups to do so.
Cool. A little bit earlier, you'd mentioned NFTs, and when we were talking about DEXs, have you seen anything out there, any sort of NFT exchanges or any places like that? I know there's not that many non-fungible tokens out there right now, but
yeah. So, like one of the things that Ethereum has done really well is having these token standards. So there's the ERC20 token standard, which is like almost any token you get on Ethereum is an ERC20. And then there's ERC 721, I think it is. That's the non-fungible token standard. And these are really useful because they create a standard across the ecosystem that makes it easier for exchanges to integrate with them. New projects that want to spin up have these sort of standards that they can go to. EOS has a token standard, but not an NFT standard as far as I understand. So hopefully someone is building that. I know there's some projects that have done NFTs, but I think they've kind of done custom tokens for that. Having a standard will be really useful and would allow more like exchanges to emerge. I haven't seen any NFT specific exchanges yet, but I believe within the EOS Knights app, you can sell these digital items. So to some extent, that's sort of an NFT exchange. And then also like Monster EOS, I think you can buy and sell those from within their site. But as far as like an NFT DEX that pulls from all these different NFT projects, we haven't seen that yet. And it'll be interesting to see if the like Block 1 DEX, for example, offers support for NFTs, because it's a little bit of a different game, right? Like you're not just like if you're selling EOS for IQ tokens, right? Like every IQ token is fungible. It's equal. It's the same with the EOS tokens. You can do those transactions. You can build that order book and do those transactions easily. If I'm selling some EOS for CryptoKitty, well, if I'm buying, Happy Money Man CryptoKitty versus, like Nebula CryptoKitty, then it's going to be a different value. So it's a slightly different structure for the exchange. But I would guess that the Block 1 guys have that taken care of.
Yeah, hopefully for sure. And again, it's probably something or possibly something that the gaming industry will drive forward. Like we have the Steam marketplace in the centralized gaming industry where they can trade skins and weapons and things. And
oh yeah, I always get confused when people talk about Steam because I always think of the Steam blockchain, but
yeah,
it's STEAM it's a gaming marketplace.
Yep. It's a gaming marketplace. So it's like basically you were talking about skins and weapons and things like that. There is a centralized gaming marketplace where you can trade all these items and buy and sell them with credit cards and real money and things like that. But the problem is that the developers still have control over the items. The developers still have control over whether those items continue to exist or not. And people, when there's updates, people will lose their purchased items and things like that. So
totally. The other thing is that and you have to think about why that's the case, right? Like if you're the developer of World of Warcraft, you don't want people to be able to sort of take those items outside of the game ecosystem that you control because it affects your ability to extract value from that ecosystem. Now, if you imagine, say that, people there, there's thousands of users using EOS Knights every day. They own all these digital items, and all of a sudden the developers behind EOS Knights like pull some BS and say, we're gonna do something in the game that people like hate. Well, if you are a savvy game developer, you may see an opportunity there to say, hey, EOS Knights community, we're building an alternative to EOS Knights with a new set of rules that sort of better reflect what the community wants. And you can bring all of your items over here and we'll honor them in the same way that if you had a level 12, wizard wand in EOS Knights, you're going to have a level 12 wizard wand in this new game as well. And it gives users a lot of control to be able to sort of port over to other places that could sort of honor those items. And then the other thing is it it gives you sort of a provenance for your items in an interesting way. So like we know that in the gaming space, there's like you're now seeing like gaming celebrities, right? Like this like ninja guy is like has millions of subscribers on YouTube, and he just plays Fortnite. And so if you had a gun that was owned by Ninja in Fortnite, you could actually, that would command a lot of value, and you can actually trace that provenance through the blockchain to say like, absolutely, this is certified, the gun that Ninja used to kill the last standing, whatever in the greatest game that was ever played or whatever. And like, I think that part of things is going to become a really interesting factor that drives valuations as well.
Oh, it's wild, man. I hadn't thought of that yet. That's like, getting assigned a baseball from Barry Bonds or something, getting a home run ball or, something like that. How interesting. Oh my God.
And I think to people who are like over a certain age, it probably sounds crazy that we're talking about this.
Yeah.
But I think for like a younger generation that's more used to buying these digital items, and like, I think that's, to them, there's going to be no real observable difference between buying a baseball bat that Barry Bonds used and buying a digital weapon that Ninja used.
Well, I mean, I had some questions about this as well, so I started digging in, like, what is going on? For one thing, this stunning fact is that the World Gaming Championships or something is multiple times more watched than the Super Bowl in the NFL.
No way.
So like the amount of people that are watching is like kind of stunning. As well, all you have to do if you're not familiar with what's going on is go on Twitch and watch Ninja, and the screen has like money that falls out of the sky as people tip him, and as he's like winning the game and like talking and interacting, literally money's just falling out of the sky. Tips, like a constant stream of like 10, 15, 20 bucks, $5. It's like, what is going on? This is amazing. So yeah, there's some things going on if you're not familiar with gaming that are really interesting to look into. I'm not a big gamer either, but I played video games, but until I dug into what's going on with this professional gaming, I had no idea. And he already, I think Ninja already makes possibly, I don't want to, it's something like outrageous amount of money. Like maybe even,
I think it's north of like 20 million a year.
Yeah. So, and I can only imagine he's making 20 million a year. If he starts selling like his non-fungible in-game items as well, like he could be, he's going to be crushing it. So
yeah,
very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah. And I think like, so to sort of get back to what I was saying earlier, like a lot of the incumbents see that that's a threat to them, right? Like they can't think about if these tips were going peer-to-peer rather than like through Twitch, right? Yeah. The Twitch is obviously taking a cut of that in some sense. Doing that peer-to-peer is better for Ninja, better for the users, probably worse off for Twitch. So I don't necessarily expect that some of the gaming incumbents are going to jump on this opportunity. I think there will be upstarts that see that this is a very unique opportunity and sort of cater to building experiences around this new paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be basically this new tool in developers' tool belts, and some people choose to use it integrated into games, and it'll surely will start slow. Also saw had an interesting thought about gaming DACs, because I know that like World of Warcraft over the years had some changes, like you were saying, within the game that the users didn't necessarily like. Now, if these users are really, into this is their world, they put a lot of time into it. So the ability for them to maybe vote on upcoming changes through some sort of gaming DAC could be a huge change in how gaming, how these 10-year long games, how they make upgrades along the way. It makes sense to give some of that power to the users. So
absolutely. I think I actually just saw on Twitter recently that like apparently Minecraft does something along those lines where they conduct user polls. I don't know much about it. I'd have to look more into it, because the natural question is like, well, how do they prevent Sybil attacks? How do they know that it's actually unique users or whatever? Maybe it's by accounts. I'm not a Minecraft user, so I don't know. But yeah, certainly I think that's an interesting model. It also gets back to what we were talking about earlier with like fully centralized versus fully decentralized. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of these games, the game itself will mostly exist off chain, but the sort of ownership and transfer of assets will exist on chain. So, you can't necessarily but it could be possible that like you have a game that is fully on chain, and if that's the case, then someone could actually just fork the game code and create an alternative version. But maybe the game will exist mostly off chain, but the ownership and transfer will exist on chain. But you could still see a competitor saying, hey, like I said earlier, we're going to spin up a competing version and honor these tokens as well. Come over if you want to play our version.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is, great stuff about EOS here. Let's kind of transition a little bit and talk about Aurora EOS, because you got a block producer, that's been working its way up the ranks. So let's talk a bit about that. What's your main focus as a block producer? What's your unique provide that you're doing?
Yeah. So our main focus is really around like education, and I would say more recently governance issues with regards to EOS. So I think that EOS has a really interesting structure, and delegated proof of stake and on-chain voting. They're all very interesting. They're also all super immature in a lot of ways, because they haven't been tried at scale before. A lot of people in the ecosystem who are token holders aren't fully sort of aware of the importance of these processes and all of that. But particularly, EOS is a system of on-chain governance. So you've got the token holders have the ability to contribute to determining how this blockchain evolves, and who is running it as validators, and what features are integrated and all of that. And I think in order to have a healthy and mature system of governance, you need voters to be informed, and you need the important voters who are the ones who have a lot of say, whether that's proxies or whales or enterprises or DApps or whoever, to be able to make good decisions about the future of the blockchain and things that are being decided by on-chain governance. And so we saw an opportunity to contribute to those discussions and sort of be a block producer that makes our name in providing kind of detailed analysis of the ecosystem in order to offer materials that would help people make more informed decisions. And specifically recently, we've been really focused on governance, because I think this is kind of the key issue driving EOS forward. So when we first decided that we were going to do a block producer, we surveyed the ecosystem to see what was out there, what were the different models that block producers were trying, what was being offered, and where did we see a lack of things that we thought we could contribute. And there's a lot of different types of block producers. There's some that are super focused on, for example, DApp development. There's some that are really focused on building infrastructure tools like Graymass with their amazing wallet and their APIs. There's some that are focused on, working on testnets and actually like optimizing the core code of EOS. There's some that are focused on building developer tools. And so we saw a lot of really talented teams out there that were doing that. And that wasn't really where we wanted to focus our efforts. We wanted to focus on the education side of things. So we started by doing, we're releasing a lot of articles that are discussing some of these really important issues. We are doing a weekly roundup newsletter that offers sort of curated list of what's going on in EOS, as well as some commentary around there. We just launched the EOS Voter Podcast. That is a podcast where we bring on individual guests to talk about very specific issues. And then, a thing that we started doing more recently is we realized that there is a pretty big communication barrier between the Western and the Eastern communities in EOS. So we've been in discussions with some of the block producers in China. We have a community rep who is working for us on the ground in China, and we're doing a lot to sort of help make sure that the dialogues that are happening on Twitter and Telegram here in the West are making their way to WeChat and Bihu and some of those channels there in the East, and vice versa. Because I think that's really important. The Chinese community in EOS is absolutely massive. They're contributing a lot of important ideas, and we want to make sure those don't get lost in the mix.
Yeah, the Chinese community is like such an enigma, because you forget how massive they are and how much must be going on in China. But it's like, as English speakers, we kind of are centric to our own language. And so, I
Yeah,
mean, I just imagine all the stuff going on here. Imagine there. Yeah. Go ahead.
there's the language barrier, and then there's also the like the channel barrier. Like I would say, and I'm sure you would agree with this, that like the epicenter of discourse around EOS here in the West is Telegram, followed pretty closely by Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of those are tools that are commonly used in China.
Yeah.
Whereas like WeChat is sort of the Telegram equivalent, and then there's a website called Baihu that's sort of a Steam kind of Twitter type of thing that is very popular within the EOS community. And then there's also, you've got like Weibo and things like that. But those are just those are kind of siloed channels. So it's not just the language barrier, it's the fact that those things are taking place in different channels, and it can be hard to penetrate those communities and get a sense of what's going on there. So I think one of the most valuable skill sets in EOS right now are the people who either speak both, English and Chinese, or Korean and Chinese. If you're a super badass, you're probably speaking Korean, Chinese, and English, and then you're like, EOS hero. But I think we need more people who can bridge that gap and be those community representatives sort of across both worlds. So, I've built relationships with some people in the community who do that. And like I said, we've got a guy who's now working with us at Aurora, doing that. And that's been really helpful. And it's really opened up my mind to a lot of the interesting things happening over there, the ideas around how EOS should work, and all sorts of things.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we need to get on Duolingo, dude, and start just hitting it super hard for the next year or two.
Just grinding it out. Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. So what's some things that are going on over there maybe that we wouldn't expect? Like what's kind of the feel in China for the direction of EOS and
this has been sort of like a more recent project of ours. Originally we were getting a lot of our our content translated into Chinese, sort of put out on the right channels, and the Chinese channels and all of that. But it's really been more recently that we've been making a really concerted effort to try and connect with those community members and understand that and things like that. So I don't necessarily want to speak to specific issues quite yet, but like one of the things we're exploring is like the debate around ECAF, for example. At Aurora, we've made our position super clear that we think ECAF is a bad idea. We think that it's an attack vector for EOS. I think it prevents it from scaling socially. We've written about it. If anyone wants to go read our stuff, we feel pretty strongly about that. Now, within the community out here, we got a lot of, I think, positive feedback on that from other block producers and other community members, for the most part, who tended to agree. Now, when we put that out to the Chinese community, we got some kickback on, for reasons or objections that weren't necessarily raised here. Not to say that people didn't agree, but people had, maybe slightly different views on that. So that was really important for us to explore, because we might have, sort of put our finger to the wind here in the West and gotten a certain sense of how the community feels, and not gotten the sort of full input from the community globally. And in terms of like sheer numbers, I think the number of EOS users and token holders and all that is much bigger in China than it is in the United States and Europe. So it's really important to be connected to that world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a I look forward to hearing how that develops. I'd love to touch base with you and kind of keep my finger on the pulse there as well. That's pretty cool. So you've got the education for the community, and through writing Medium articles, the podcast, the weekly release, focused on kind of the governance issues and things like that right now in China, with the translations. What else is going on with you guys?
I think right now we're really making our focus on governance, because I think this is the issue that's going to define EOS, for the foreseeable future. We are also taking a close look at sort of the side chain and sister chains ecosystem, because I think it's becoming more clear that horizontal scaling through a number of different chains is going to be a big part of the future of EOS. And we've talked to a number of DApp developers who are thinking specifically about building as either a side chain or a sister chain. We've got a couple things up our sleeve that I can't quite come public with yet, but yeah, I mean, right now our focus is absolutely on governance, because I think that's the most important thing. The other thing is that, you know, we're focused on making sure that our business model is a sustainable one and one that has staying power, because you know, right now we're in the middle of a pretty prolonged bear market that very well could continue for the foreseeable future. And if you're, you know, running a business where your revenue depends on the price of a token in one of the most highly volatile markets on earth is not the easiest way to run a business, as I'm sure many other block producers would tell you. So we're really focused on making sure that we have the ability to continue to offer, you know, services to the EOS community, continue to bring value, even as the market conditions aren't necessarily in our favor.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting shakeout that we're having here as far as the price dropping, and I know that's putting some pressure on a lot of the BPs, which may actually end up, you know, there's this idea that it may end up being a good thing to make the chain more resilient, make BPs more resilient. Yeah, what do you think on that as far as the price dropping and BPs having to deal with it?
Yeah, so I think in the long run, the price drop could ultimately be a good thing for EOS for a number of reasons. I think the main one is that, you know, EOS launched in June of this year. If it had just been 2 years of straight bull market, followed by some major crash, I think that the chain could have had a lot of issues dealing with that. Whereas having a bear market early on gives us a lot more information to prepare for the future. So, you know, 6 or 7 months ago, the business model of being an EOS block producer did not exist. And everyone who's doing it now is sort of a first timer, and there's no blueprint for how to build a successful business doing EOS block production. And so what the bear market does is it sort of gives us a lot more data points and information on which models for a block producer have the most staying power and which ones are able to, you know, not only keep their lights on, but also keep adding value even in unfavorable market conditions. You know, you've got a lot of different block producers, as I mentioned before, that have different models and different ways of serving the community, and, you know, potentially different revenue models, or, you know, multiple sources of income, or whatever it may be. And having a brutal bear market early on really is gonna help us find out which ones of those have staying power, you know, which teams have planned accordingly and are able to continue to serve the community. And I think that's going to be that's really important, because we kind of get that out of the way early on, and it allows us to learn so that we're prepared for in the future if we have another run up and then a crash and all of that, which, you know, these markets are going to take, the crypto markets are going to take years and years and years to mature. So that's very possible. The other thing, the reason that I think this bear market could potentially be good and in the long run for EOS is that like the EOS token sale happened over the course of like mid 2017 to mid 2018, which was the craziest period of speculative mania that we've ever seen in these markets. And so you had a lot of people who were buying into EOS simply for speculation purposes. And as a result, those people were, you know, most likely keeping their tokens on exchanges, not participating in voting. They were really only interested in the price action. And I think what the bear market does is it shakes out a lot of those people who are simply in it for speculation. And the people who are buying EOS right now, you know, I can't confirm for sure, but my instinct is that those people have a more long-term outlook, have a better sense of what it is that what the model is that EOS runs on, being DPoS, and will be more sort of active voters in the future. Rather than just simply speculators, or, you know, the people who are accumulating right now are maybe the people who are planning on building on EOS, so they have a long-term commitment there. And I think having voters who really have a long-term interest in EOS is how governance can come to function successfully. So like right now you've got a lot of speculators who are keeping their tokens on exchanges. Maybe those exchanges are using those tokens to vote on behalf of holders or whatever it may be. I think in the future, if things go well, and this is sort of yet to be determined, but I think we'll have a lot of businesses that are built on EOS that participate in governance because that's what's good for their business. You know, we mentioned how like the betting applications kind of proved the first, they were the first proof that you could build a fully on-chain business that is profitable and successful. So if you own or participate in one of those businesses, you're very incentivized to make sure that EOS has block producers who are honest, who are contributing to infrastructure, who are improving the network, rather than just sort of like rent-seeking puppet block producers, because the future of your business depends on the health and security of EOS as a platform. And so, you know, when in EOS's early days, there was a lot of speculators and very little that was actually built on top of it. As those ratios sort of invert, then I think governance gets a lot healthier. And I think the bear market can contribute to that sort of redistribution of tokens from speculators towards builders and people with a long-term outlook in a positive way.
Yeah. My favorite point in there is the one about the timing of the bear market. I think it's it is actually fortuitous timing. If you look at it from, if we were in some big run up, and the block producers built too big, or everyone kind of built infrastructure, these complex systems too big, too fast, without kind of any checks or balances, makes it very fragile. So if we would have had a run up and then a fall, I mean, it could have been a much more, it could have hurt the chain a lot more. Whereas this fall early makes it more resilient, makes it more,
And I think it makes block producers realize that they need to plan for this kind of thing. Even if the token price goes up temporarily and your margins are a little bit higher, you shouldn't necessarily go out there and hire 5 additional engineers because next week that additional could be, or those margins could be compressed significantly. So, like I said, it's not an easy business to be in. It's very new, and there's a lot of factors to consider. But every time we have challenges like this, it gives us additional data points to learn from and integrate into our businesses.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we saw a kind of sad example with Steemit Inc. Getting just wrecked because of basically the same situation. They were running their business and paying their people off the hopes of token price maintaining or increasing. So yeah, it's good to get this over with, or not. It's not over with, but it's good to shake the tree a little bit, I think. So
absolutely,
yeah. So kind of the last topic as far as Aurora EOS, and then we'll start winding down here. But governance, that's your focus. So just tell a little bit about governance, what your angles are, what you think the future looks like for EOS governance, or yeah. So
I think a lot of it is what I just talked about with regards to, I think in a DPoS system. So the delegated proof of stake has been tried before a number of times in a number of different permutations with different projects. It has never been tried at the scale that it's currently being tried with EOS right now. So to some extent, it is still a very experimental. Now, my hypothesis has been that you can develop a very healthy ecosystem of governance if you have some of the things that I was describing before, which are either businesses that are built on top of EOS with a long-term vested interest in the project, or another thing that I think will be helpful is something like the resource exchange. So if you're a large EOS token holder, maybe you're not running a DAP, but you're leasing out your tokens to some of those successful DApps that are built on EOS, and you're getting a return for that. You have you have an interest in preserving that recurring income stream from renting out your resources, but also in order to rent out those resources, you have to lock up your tokens for a prolonged period of time. And you are thus incentivized during that time that your tokens are locked up to vote for honest block producers, because, if the chain gets attacked while your tokens are locked up, you lose a lot of value. So it's sort of, those incentives are at play here in getting people to more actively participate and getting governance to be healthier. I think the things that we have to contend with in the short term are certainly ECAP. I think that EOS should not have any sort of pre-specified arbitrator. I think arbitration is cool and interesting if you have it on a sort of on an application layer or a peer-to-peer layer. If you and I want to enter into agreement and specify an arbitrator, then there's nothing stopping us from doing that. But the idea that we should have to have all of our activities at the end of the day governed by ECAP by default is insane, and that really should I think should be removed from the Constitution and thus from the chain. So that's something we're really working hard to move forward, is like a referendum vote that would adopt a new version of the Constitution and also remove mandatory arbitration from the Constitution. I think that, side chains, applications, there's all sorts of ways that arbitration could work and users could have awesome protections, but I think that you need a base layer chain that's objective and not subjective. So that's one really important thing. And then that gets into another governance issue, which is just the Constitution. And so the Constitution plays into the issues of referendum and the issues of arbitration. So, with EOS, what you have is you have the ability to hold an on-chain vote. It's not a democracy. It's like a liquid democracy in the sense that you can either vote directly or proxy your vote to someone else, but it's not a democracy because it's not one person, one vote. It's one token, one vote. So it's a plutocracy, really. It's proof of stake. That's how it's supposed to work. Right now, what you have is users vote for block producers, and that programmatically determines the ranking of the block producers. So that's what's sort of like that voting is executed by the software. Now, in the future, we'll have what's called a referendum, which means we can hold an on-chain vote of token holders, but it's more of a poll to gauge token holder sentiment. So, if anyone remembers, like the DAO hack, they did this like thing called the carbon vote on Ethereum, where they had EOS or ETH token holders say yes or no to hard fork for the DAO. Now we can do something like that where we can hold a referendum that says, for example, should we adopt a new version of the Constitution, or should we adopt this new version of the Constitution, and token holders can vote yes or no. The important difference between this type of voting and the voting for block producers is that the voting for block producers is automatically executed by the core software. The voting for referendum is simply a signal. And it's more of a social consensus. So we have to kind of determine, say, okay, if we hold a token holder referendum and X% of token holders vote yes on adopting a new constitution, what is the percentage at which we say this should be adopted by the network? And what referendum really is it's a way for the existing block producers to gauge the sentiment of the community and then implement the changes that they want. Because at the end of the day, if you get 65% of token holders that vote yes, we should adopt this new constitution, nothing actually happens in that case unless the block producers implement it, right? It doesn't get executed automatically. And so I think it's a really useful tool for block producers, but I think people also need to recognize the limitations of a referendum, and that it really is sort of a social signal. And so the idea behind the Constitution is that we can kind of define in a wet code, human readable way what those expectations are. So we could say in the Constitution, if a vote gets 20% or more yes sustained for 30 days, then the block producers should implement it. And that to me is sort of the useful thing about a constitution, right? It provides us with like a Schelling point and a signal that, or like something that we can all turn to and say like this is the parameters that we agreed to. And so that's kind of the usefulness of a constitution. But I think beyond that, the more complicated that you make the constitution, the more unenforceable it becomes, the more complicated interactions become, the more you have disagreements about interpretations of the Constitution and stuff like that. So I think that the Constitution should be a very, very simple document that sort of outlines expectations of block producers and parameters for referendum governance. I don't think you need a whole lot more in that document, because at the end of the day, the only thing that's really enforceable is token holders voting for block producers. So that's sort of a quick summary of my thoughts around governance. But we're going to be releasing some articles that really dive into these issues in a more detailed way.
Great. Well, I'll look into those, wait for them, read them. Yeah, the Constitution is such an interesting. I mean, you can look at the U.S. Constitution, for example. They started as this kind of this base constitution. The thing with a set of rules like that starts out with this initial intent, it ends up kind of being used as a way to slowly interpret to gain more centralized power.
Yep.
Whereas like it's never interpreted to take power away from kind of a central entity. It's always interpreted to give a little bit more power. And over time, it turns into this perverse thing that's not really even representative of itself anymore, but it can't really go backwards. It almost gives license for this small, progressive, one-way street towards centralization. That's my kind of take on it. So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So like you're saying, man, keep it precise.
Yeah. There's a narrative that's emerged recently that I think some of the proponents of ECAF have put forward that says like ECAF is a way to provide checks and balances in the system because we can interpret the Constitution and therefore make sure that it's being properly enforced and that block producers are complying by the Constitution. I think that it's super, super short-sighted, and it's a bad idea, because what it really is like you said, it's sort of a move towards centralization and consolidating power in this party that is ECAF, that supposedly is providing oversight, but really has no, like, ECAF needs checks and balances on itself. And they're claiming to provide that for block producers. And it's not effective because, like I said, at the end of the day, the only thing that's actually enforceable is voters voting for block producers. And so that's really what should be at the core of governance. And referendum should be a tool that signals to block producers what the community wants. I think ECAF is simply, I think ECAF should be either gone, or should, if they want to continue operating, they should do so as an application or as a third-party service on top of the blockchain. But I don't think ECAF fits into the core governance model of EOS at all.
Yeah, and I like the third-party app approach because anyone who's listening to this podcast knows that I'm big on kind of natural systems and robust and anti-fragile like ways of approaching, and this having multiple different ways to arbitrate and letting people choose, and some are better for systems than others. Some will break and disappear, and some will work and be used more often. I mean, that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. Think about it today. If you're a business, you may set up you may register your business in a different jurisdiction depending on what you're doing, or tax implications or things like that. I think in the same way, you'll have people choosing to do business with different arbitrators based on any number of factors. So Tokenica is an awesome block producer from Poland that's doing some really cool work on this with actual automated arbitration through smart contracts that is completely opt-in and completely automated, which means that block producers don't have to get involved, which is a huge part of the scalability aspect of how arbitration is currently structured. You can't have it be that block producers need to constantly update lists and things like that. So, shameless plug for our EOS Voter podcast. I'm having Marcin from Tokenica on later today that we'll be recording to specifically discuss this topic of arbitration, why the current system is broken and what can be done to fix it. And they're doing a lot of work on that front, because it's silly to just criticize this and say like, hey, let's get rid of it without offering some solutions. But the good news is that there's a lot of teams, EOS Titan being another one, that are working on really, really smart, innovative solutions to this that don't break the security model of the network.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I got to check out your podcast. I haven't heard it before, but
we just released the first episode last week. We did it with Alex from EOS Canada to talk about scaling. Great. So the idea behind our podcast is that we want to dive into very specific issues. So for each podcast, we'll focus on a different issue. So the first one, we talked about scaling with Alex from EOS Canada. And we dove into all the different future improvements and ways that EOS can scale to support thousands of dApps and millions of users in the future. For the next one, we're going to talk to Marcin. We're going to talk about arbitration, and it's going to be an entire podcast about arbitration. So if you're a listener who's interested in that particular issue, then there's going to be a podcast for you. And we've got a few other really cool guests lined up. So I'm excited for it.
Cool, man. I love, that's how I do most of my learning is through podcasts, audio books. Yeah. And then the reason I actually do this podcast is it started out, I just wanted to, I was just trying to learn more and more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is self-serving in the sense I get to have conversations with like really smart people who know a lot more than I do about certain issues.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. It's a great, it is self-serving. Exactly. I love it. Well, as we wind up here, I want to ask a little bit about you because I dug in, did some research as I tend to do, and saw that you were maybe a chef in Mexico. You started a music company. You worked production for like a movie studio or a creative studio. Like, tell me about Mexico. That's kind of the one I was most interested in.
Yeah. So I studied economics in college. That's when I first found out about like Bitcoin and later BitShares and some of these other early projects, like watched Ethereum go live. Was super interested in the space, but this was, I graduated college in mid 2015, which was, in the middle of a really brutal crypto bear market. There wasn't a ton of opportunities to work in the industry. And I come from a family of cooks. Food is really, really important in our family. And it's, believe it or not, I have interest outside of crypto that sometimes I get to spend a little bit of time on, but cooking is definitely, one of my biggest passions. So I always had the desire to go to cooking school or, maybe spend some time working in a restaurant. And particularly I was interested in going abroad to learn because I also love to travel. So after I graduated, I packed up and moved to Mexico City, where I went to cooking school for 6 months at a cool little program out there. And then I moved to Tulum, Mexico, where I worked in a restaurant. It's like an open, wood-fired, open air restaurant, sort of in the jungle near the beach, in this really amazing part of Mexico, using all local ingredients and really, really like old school wood-fired grill and oven cooking techniques, and it was awesome. It was a super cool learning experience, and I kind of entered that with the idea that I would do it to learn because I wanted to get better at cooking, and that's exactly what it was. So it was super fun. I had a great time. I learned a lot. I managed to keep up with the crypto world a little bit because there was still a lot of really cool stuff happening at that time, even though the bear market was still going on. And then eventually decided to move back and dive into crypto full time. And that's when I joined Multicoin Capital, which was the crypto hedge fund that I was working for prior to starting Aurora.
Nice, man. Well, that makes me want to go to it's a bear market right now. I might just head down to Mexico and
I know, right? Yeah.
Learn how to cook in the jungle. That sounds nice, man.
Yeah, it's calling my name again.
That's fantastic. Well, cool. And as we wrap up here, I just want to explain my black eye, which also has a correlation with you. I do jujitsu, and so that's why I have a black eye. For anyone watching this, wondering what I've been up to.
Did you accidentally get like hit with an elbow or a heel or something?
Yeah, it was an elbow or maybe like a forearm just across the face or something. But I mentioned that to Myles to explain, why I look like a goofball today. And you also do jujitsu, which is rad. So
yeah, I started doing it actually when I was living in Mexico.
Oh, really? Cool.
Continued, doing it here. But jujitsu is awesome. It's anyone who's looking for a new hobby that's super addictive, really fun, great for you physically, and you'll meet some really cool people and learn some cool stuff. I couldn't recommend jiu-jitsu more.
Yeah, beautiful. It's almost like a really intense meditation or something. Like nothing else is going on in the world at that point. It's this kind of
it's pure flow state, and very it's actually funny. Like I know a lot of guys who are sort of really into like computers and stuff who are really into jiu-jitsu because it's very tactical. And they call it human chess for a reason, but it's very cerebral as well. And I think a lot of people are attracted to that. So yeah, we should get more of the EOS community into into jiu-jitsu, we can start sponsoring. We can put Aurora EOS on the back of some gis and get them into competitions.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Hey, man. Well, this has been a blast. This is why I love doing the podcast. I love talking to interesting people smarter than me, people that have all these angles. I'm here to learn, and so thanks for talking with me, man. It's been a blast.
Oh, I had a great time too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and where can people find you on the socials? What's the best place?
It's Twitter is at Myles Snider, at Myles_Snider, Myles with a Y, Snider with an I, at Aurora EOS BP on Twitter, and then AuroraEOS.com is our website, and you can find links to all our socials in there. Ping us on Telegram, ping us on Twitter, reach out to say hi if you want to talk about the governance issues, if you want to, learn about some of the other stuff that we've written about, we're on Medium, Steam, Bihoo, WeChat, Telegram, Twitter, you name it. Okay. And we got a podcast too. So
yeah, read your Medium article, come talk about governance in Telegram, and listen to the podcast. I'll put those in the show notes for my EOS podcast friends. And much love to everyone. Pleasure being here. Thanks for coming on, Myles.
Thank you.
Cheers.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is just a
Clap along if you feel like